I never told my wife's relatives that I was the owner of a company worth $16.9 million, a company that also happened to pay many of their salaries. Then, just before Christmas Eve, they threw my 16-year-old daughter out into the freezing snow. That same night, while she was crying on the phone from a snowbank, I was standing ankle-deep in icy water inside a commercial building I owned, trying to fix a burst pipe. Take a moment and picture that. My daughter was outside wearing nothing but a thin Christmas sweater, shaking from the cold in minus 22 degrees Celsius weather. Just beyond the glowing windows, around 40 members of her mother's family were inside laughing together and drinking homemade eggnog, as if nothing had happened. Meanwhile, after driving for an hour and a half to an emergency job, I was soaked to the bone, standing in freezing water while dealing with a major plumbing failure in a property that legally belonged to me. That was the part they never knew. For 8 years, I kept the truth hidden because my wife asked me to. And that same secret was about to end several of their careers before the new year even arrived. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm a guy who works with his hands. My name is Nathan Bennett. I'm 41 years old. Back in 2011, I started Bennett Home Solutions with just $18,000 I'd managed to save from construction jobs, a used work van, and the contractor's license I'd earned several years before I met Olivia. By 2023, the business had grown to 44 employees, 3 regional managers, an annual revenue of $16.9 million. Our company handled maintenance contracts for both residential and commercial properties across 5 different districts. We were still privately owned, but large enough to compete for institutional contracts. I never bragged about any of it. People who build something from nothing usually don't. Olivia, my wife, took pride in different things. She cared about her last name. She cared about the Mercer family reputation. Her family represented that strange combination of old money appearances mixed with constant anxiety about money, the worst mix imaginable. Her father, Richard Mercer, had spent 30 years as a middle-level manager for a paper distribution company. Somewhere along the way, he convinced himself that a person's worth could be measured entirely by the size of their paycheck and the label attached to their name. Richard talked about class the same way some people talk about religion. All the time, with complete confidence. And almost always while looking down on somebody else. The first time Olivia brought me to meet her family, I showed up wearing jeans, work boots, and a worn-out jacket. I drove an old Ford F-250 that was missing part of the front bumper. Richard slowly looked me over from head to toe the way someone inspects merchandise they've already decided not to buy. "So you're a handyman," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a judgment. "He's a field manager," Olivia quickly corrected. That was the first lie. She said it so naturally that I almost didn't notice it happen. I convinced myself it wasn't important. I was in love. At 33 years old, I had completely fallen for a woman who laughed at my terrible jokes and teased me about my rough, calloused hands. 8 months later, we got married during a small ceremony. The Mercer family arrived dressed in matching outfits that made them look more like a coordinated team than wedding guests. I wore the nicest blazer I owned, and before dinner even started, I'd already heard 3 separate comments about it. After the reception, Olivia gently took both of my hands. She looked into my eyes with those bright green eyes she always used whenever she wanted something. "They're proud people, Nathan," she said softly. "If they ever find out the truth, they'll never accept you. Please. Just let them believe you're only the boss. Let me deal with my family." I should have asked what that arrangement would look like years down the road. I never did. Instead, I simply nodded, squeezed her hands, and quietly packed away a piece of myself that would stay hidden for the next 8 years. Silence has its own architecture, and this is what living inside it feels like. You attend 43 Mercer family gatherings. You sit around the dinner table while your father-in-law makes jokes about your trade. You smile anyway. You pass the bread basket. You listen as Richard proudly introduces you as a famous plumber. All while wearing a watch that I could have replaced 12 times over with what my company earned in a single quarter. Then Olivia quietly asks if her brother Ethan Mercer could use a job. Because I loved my wife, and because I wanted peace at home, I hired him. His salary was $71,000 a year. Then came Ethan's brother, Brandon. After him came Richard's nephew Logan. Then 4 cousins. 2 uncles. A longtime family friend named Ryan, whom Richard personally recommended. Eventually I opened our employee database, typed the name Mercer, and before I'd even finished entering the word, 11 employees appeared on the screen. When I dug deeper, I realized that 47 people connected in one way or another to the Mercer family had worked for my company. Some of them didn't even know each other. Some weren't blood relatives at all. But there were enough connections to make the whole thing spread quietly through the business like a disease. I chose not to examine it too closely. Olivia had asked me not to, and I loved her. Sometimes love isn't one dramatic sacrifice. Sometimes it's just years of tiny decisions that seem harmless until they all pile up. I let Richard spend money my company earned while laughing at jokes about my career. I let Olivia's mother, Susan, the same woman who treated silk scarves like everyday clothing, hand me an envelope in 2019 and suggest I use it to buy a proper church suit before an important family event. Without opening it, I placed the envelope back into her hand. I appreciate the thought, Susan, I told her, and I honestly meant it. Looking back now, the hardest part wasn't even the insults. It was the excuses I kept making to myself. I convinced myself I was playing the long game. I told myself none of it mattered because I knew the truth, even if nobody else did. I repeated those lies to myself so often that they almost sounded noble. The reality was much simpler. I was afraid of ruining Olivia's happiness, even when protecting hers slowly destroyed mine. Then came the holiday season of 2023, December 21st. At exactly 7:50 that evening, a major pipe burst inside the Kellerman Commerce Plaza, a 72-unit apartment complex our company had maintained for the previous 4 years. One of my best technicians, Kevin Morales, reached the site first. After inspecting the damage, he called me because the break had reached the main supply line, and fixing it required my approval. Before leaving, I called Olivia. She and our daughter Emma were already at her parents' house. "I'll be at least 2 hours late," I told her. "Maybe longer." She sighed the same tired sigh she always used, like I had somehow planned the emergency myself. "Okay, Nathan," she answered. "We'll see you whenever you get here." I drove straight to the Kellerman property. I climbed into the flooded basement. Then I got to work. At exactly 9:12 p.m. my phone started ringing. Normally I wouldn't have answered. My hands were freezing, covered in grime, and I was focused on shutting off the damaged line. Then I looked at the screen. It was Emma. Without even thinking, every fatherly instinct I had made me answer. "Dad." Her voice sounded raw. Behind her, all I could hear was the wind. "If you'd like, send the next section and I'll keep the style, pacing, and voice consistent throughout the entire story. Please come get me," she whispered. "I'm outside, and it's freezing." I climbed out of that flooded basement so fast I slammed my shoulder against a pipe and barely felt it. "What? Emma, where are you? What happened?" She struggled to answer. "I'm at Grandpa Richard's house. He started making fun of your truck again. He was joking about the missing sprinkler and saying that's the kind of work you do. I just asked him to stop. I told him it wasn't funny." She paused, trying to steady her breathing. "He got really mad." Her voice cracked. "He said I was disrespecting him in his own house. Then he ordered me outside to cool off until I was ready to apologize. I don't think anyone expected me to stay out there that long, but nobody came to bring me back inside either." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Where's your mother?" Silence. "Emma, where's your mom?" After what felt like forever, but couldn't have been more than 3 seconds, she finally answered. "She told me I should just apologize." Everything inside me went cold. "Dad, I'm already on my way." "Emma, listen carefully. It'll take me about an hour, but I'm coming as fast as I can." "What are you wearing? Do you have your coat?" "I only have my Christmas sweater. My coat's still inside. -22 degrees. A thin holiday sweater. My 16-year-old daughter had been thrown into the snow because she defended me. I covered a 91-minute drive in just 63 minutes. Honestly, I barely remember any of it. The only things that stayed with me were the temperature display glowing on the dashboard and the strange kind of anger growing inside my chest. It wasn't explosive. It wasn't loud. It was cold. The kind of cold that never warms up. When I finally pulled into Richard's driveway, I saw Emma standing near the end of the snow-covered slope. She had both arms wrapped tightly around herself. Her backpack rested beside her feet, like she'd planned to leave but had nowhere to go afterward. Through the brightly lit front window, I could see flames dancing in the fireplace. I saw Richard standing by the dining table, laughing at something. Olivia was near the kitchen entrance with a champagne glass in her hand, smiling with that polished expression she always wore whenever she wanted to charm a room. She never once stepped outside. I walked straight to Emma without saying a word and wrapped my coat around her shoulders. The second she saw me, she buried herself against my chest, holding onto my ribs exactly the way she used to when she was little and I'd come home after long shifts. I held her there for a long time. She couldn't stop trembling. Then I turned toward the house. I didn't knock. I kicked the front door open. The door slammed into the inside wall with a crack that echoed through the house like a starting pistol. Instantly, everything stopped. The music died. Forks were lowered. Conversations disappeared. 40 people turned to stare at me. Richard stood near the fireplace with a drink in his hand. From outside he'd looked larger than life. Standing there in person, he suddenly seemed much smaller. I slowly looked around the room until I spotted Emma's winter coat lying across a chair near the entrance. I walked over, picked it up, and turned toward the door to take it back outside. That's when Olivia stepped in front of me. She crossed the room with that calm, graceful walk I'd watched for the past 8 years. In her hands was a thick stack of papers held together by a rubber band. Without saying a word, she shoved them hard against my chest until I had no choice but to catch them. "You've humiliated this family long enough," she said. Her voice was smooth, controlled, practiced. She had rehearsed this moment. "Those are divorce papers. I want you out of my house by tomorrow morning." Richard took one slow step forward. He was smiling. Not the smile of someone enjoying a joke. The smile of someone who had waited years for this exact moment. Then he looked past me through the open doorway toward Emma. "Tell your father to make sure that junk truck of his has enough gas," he said. "Wouldn't want it breaking down on the way home." Someone laughed. Then another. I stood there looking around the room. Richard, Olivia, every cousin, every uncle, every nephew, every family friend, every single person whose paycheck or mortgage I had quietly helped support during the last 8 years. Some couldn't meet my eyes. Others looked at me with the kind of pity people reserve for a dog that's reached the end of its life. Without saying another word, I tucked the divorce papers under my arm. "You're right about one thing, Olivia," I said quietly. "It's time." Then I turned around and walked out. Emma was already waiting beside my beat-up work truck. They believed they'd just thrown out a broke handyman. They had no idea what they'd actually done. For the first 20 minutes of the drive, neither of us spoke. The heater blasted warm air through the cab, while Emma sat curled up in the passenger seat with her knees pulled close, finally wearing her winter coat. She stared silently out the dark window. Eventually she broke the silence. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I just made everything worse." I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my fingers started to ache. "No," I told her. "You did exactly the right thing. You did the most honest thing anyone in that house has done in years." She eventually fell asleep before we reached the hotel I'd booked while driving through Highway 9. It was a courtyard Marriott. 2 double beds. A room service menu sitting on the desk. A room number neither of us would remember the next morning. After Emma fell asleep, I stayed awake in the dark. The divorce papers lay on the table. I didn't read them like a husband. I read them like a businessman. Everything had been professionally prepared. Olivia had hired a family law attorney named Victor Bishop. I searched his name online immediately. 12 years in practice. A respectable mid-sized firm specializing in divorce cases involving substantial assets. That alone told me Olivia hadn't made this decision overnight. She'd been planning it for quite a while. The petition cited irreconcilable differences. She wanted the house, a significant share of my liquid assets. And according to the filing, my primary source of income was listed simply as my paid management position at an unnamed property maintenance company. She knew exactly what I owned. Leaving the company out of the initial filing wasn't ignorance. It was strategy. At the time, I simply hadn't realized how long she'd been planning it. At 11:48 that night, I opened my laptop. I signed into our employee management system. I searched one word, Mercer. 47 records appeared. Then I started a complete personnel audit. This part matters, so I want to be very clear. I didn't start firing people out of anger. I didn't make emotional decisions. My hands weren't shaking. My judgment wasn't clouded. I sat quietly in that hotel room with painfully slow internet and reviewed every employee file using the exact same systematic process I'd followed for every major business decision during the previous 12 years. I opened Aprio, the auditing software we'd relied on for the last 2 years, along with the accountability platform we used for every quarterly internal review. I approached it exactly the way I approached every serious problem in my company, with facts, documentation, and patience. Right at midnight, I started the audit. I configured the software to flag any irregularities connected to employees with ties to the Mercer family over the previous 36 months. The system estimated it would take 94 minutes to finish, so I made myself a terrible cup of coffee and started reading through files one by one. The first report that caught my attention belonged to my brother-in-law, Ethan Mercer. As regional head of procurement, he'd manipulated fuel card records for nearly 19 months. The audit showed a total of $34,200 in unauthorized fuel expenses. GPS logs confirmed company vehicles had been used for 3 separate family vacations that had absolutely nothing to do with assigned work routes. Next came Brandon Mercer. He handled accounts receivable. The audit revealed he'd been sending duplicate factoring invoices to 6 client accounts, then diverting the difference through a fake email address he'd created with a free email provider. It was almost impressive. Not because it was clever, but because of how unbelievably sloppy it was. The total financial loss came to $61,400. Richard Mercer wasn't employed by my company, but his name appeared repeatedly as the beneficiary of client entertainment expenses submitted by Ethan and Brandon between 2021 and 2023. Restaurant bills. A resort hotel stay in Scottsdale. 2 rounds of golf at a private club where each round cost $400. Every one of those personal expenses had been submitted as legitimate business costs. I kept going. By 3:30 that morning, I'd reviewed all 47 employee files. 14 contained documented financial misconduct. The remaining 33 had clean records. Some of those employees happened to share the Mercer name or were connected to the family in some distant way, but they'd done absolutely nothing wrong. I separated their files immediately. The 14 with violations were documented carefully. I didn't print a single page. Instead, I uploaded the complete audit to our company's encrypted server, complete with timestamps and secure audit logs. Only after everything was safely preserved did I make one final call. My attorney's name is Thomas Sullivan. He'd been my corporate lawyer since 2014. Thomas was 62 years old, with the face of a man who had spent decades solving problems no one else wanted to touch. In all the years I'd known him, I'd never once seen him lose his composure. That's one of the reasons I trusted him more than almost anyone else. I called him at 3:47 in the morning. He answered on the 3rd ring. That was exactly the kind of lawyer Thomas Sullivan was. I told him everything. Every secret I'd kept for 8 years. The Mercer family network inside my company. The audit results. The divorce papers. The fact that my daughter had been left standing outside in the snow on Christmas week. When I finished talking, Thomas didn't say a word. He let 11 full seconds pass. I counted every one of them. Finally he spoke. "All right. Here's what we're going to do." His voice stayed calm, methodical, completely unemotional. First, he explained that first thing the next morning, he'd file emergency paperwork formally separating my personal assets from any claims Olivia might attempt to make. The house she'd confidently referred to as hers wasn't actually owned by either of us personally. It belonged to one of my limited liability companies. The mortgage had always been paid through the business. Olivia's name didn't appear anywhere on the ownership documents. Her attorney would be receiving that information very soon. Second, the 14 employees identified by the audit would each receive termination letters through Human Resources. Every letter would include the specific company policies violated, along with supporting audit documentation. The dismissals would be legally airtight. 3 cases, Ethan, Brandon, and the fraudulent expense reports connected to Richard, would also be forwarded to the district attorney's office for possible criminal investigation. Thomas told me he'd be bringing in Rebecca Chandler from his firm. She was both a CPA and a certified fraud examiner with 15 years of experience handling financial fraud cases. Third, Thomas was very clear about one thing. No press. No social media. No public spectacle. This stays inside the proper legal channels, he said. You want justice, not theater. I looked out into the darkness for a moment. I want both, I admitted. Thomas fell silent again. Then he answered, if you trust the process, you'll get both. I slept for about 3 hours that morning. When I woke up, I changed into the navy blue suit I kept in my office for investor meetings. By 8:30 a.m., I was sitting inside company headquarters on Harrington Drive, looking out through the glass walls over the city, while drinking coffee that was actually worth drinking. At 8:58, Rebecca Chandler emailed me to confirm she'd received every audit document. The files had been secured, preserved, and reformatted to meet evidentiary standards if the matter ever reached court. Exactly at 9 a.m., our Human Resources Director, Adrian Brooks, began delivering the termination letters. Adrian had worked beside me for 6 years. He was disciplined, organized, and incredibly precise. The night before, after I'd briefed him privately, he'd only said one thing. "I'll need 2 hours to make sure every envelope is perfect." He took exactly 2 hours. Every letter was sealed. Every document was complete. At 9:05 my phone rang. Richard Mercer. I watched it ring twice before answering. "Nathan." His voice had completely changed. Gone was the arrogance. Now it sounded warm. Almost friendly. The tone people use when they suddenly need a favor. "Some idiot sent termination letters to half the family this morning," he said. "I don't know what kind of circus your company is running, but I need the phone number of your boss so I can straighten this out." I let 4 quiet seconds pass. "You already have it, Richard." Silence. Not ordinary silence. The kind that happens when someone suddenly realizes the ground beneath them isn't as solid as they thought. Then I continued. "My name is Nathan Bennett. Founder. Sole owner. Chief Executive Officer. This wasn't a mistake. Our internal audit uncovered serious financial misconduct involving several employees connected to the Mercer family. Ethan and Brandon have both been referred to the district attorney for investigation into financial theft. The evidence has already been reviewed and preserved by a certified forensic accounting expert. As for you, my attorney, Thomas Sullivan, will be contacting you regarding your name appearing on 4 fraudulent expense reports." His confidence disappeared instantly. "Nathan." "Wait, please just listen." I didn't let him finish. "And one more thing. The eviction notice Olivia sent regarding the property on Ashwood Lane. That house is owned by one of my LLCs. She has 30 days. Nathan, please." "Merry Christmas, Richard." I ended the call. Then I blocked his number. For the next 45 seconds, my phone screen never stopped lighting up. Messages poured in one after another. 12, 20, 31, 47. Phone calls, text messages, numbers I recognized, numbers I didn't, cousins, uncles, family friends. Ryan even called. Ryan was actually a good plumber, and I suspected he'd simply been caught in the middle of people whose problems had become his problems. Of the 14 employees involved, every single dismissal was supported by documented evidence. The remaining 33 employees kept their jobs. More than that, they received paid administrative leave while everything was sorted out, along with positive employment recommendations if they ever chose to leave the company. I wasn't interested in punishing innocent people just because I was angry. Anger alone accomplishes very little. Anger backed by facts, documentation, and fairness is far more effective. I finally turned my phone face down on the desk. A moment later, one notification caught my attention. It wasn't from anyone whose number I recognized. Just a single text message. From a number I didn't have saved. The message had been sent at 7:14 that morning, just as everything was beginning to unravel. It was short. "We need to talk. I know Olivia was planning this long before the divorce." That was it. Nothing else. I stared at the screen for a long time. My first instinct, the one I'm not proud of, was to ignore it. My life had already blown apart in the most organized, legally documented way imaginable. The last thing I needed was an anonymous text that could just as easily be someone trying to manipulate me as someone trying to help. Fortunately, my second instinct was better. I forwarded the message to Thomas. 8 minutes later, he called me. "Do you recognize the number?" he asked. "No. It's a local area code. Give me an hour." 45 minutes later, my phone rang again. Thomas had an answer. "The number belongs to Melissa Donovan. She's 44 years old and worked as a legal assistant for Victor Bishop's law firm for 6 years. That was the same Victor Bishop who had prepared Olivia's divorce filing. She resigned 11 days ago," Thomas added. I called her immediately. She answered on the first ring. "Mr. Bennett." Her voice was cautious. She sounded like someone who had practiced this conversation over and over but still wasn't sure how to begin. "Ms. Donovan," I said. "Why are you contacting me?" "I didn't do it for money," she replied almost immediately. "I resigned because they asked me to participate in something I wasn't comfortable with. I've spent the last 2 weeks trying to decide whether I could live with staying silent." "Tell me everything." She did. What she told me changed everything. I'd assumed Olivia had met with Victor Bishop 2 or 3 months before filing for divorce because of how complete the paperwork was. I was wrong. Olivia had consulted him 14 months earlier. January of 2023. She'd been planning our divorce for well over a year. But that wasn't even the worst part. According to Melissa, Olivia had provided the law firm with confidential information about Bennett Home Solutions, corporate ownership records, asset valuations, financial statements, lists of company property. Then she asked Victor Bishop how to structure the divorce so the true value of my company would remain hidden during the initial asset disclosure process. Bishop explained the strategy. If Nathan Bennett could be presented as nothing more than a salaried employee rather than the owner of the business. And if the divorce petition listed my employer only as an unnamed property maintenance company, the case would initially be valued far below its actual worth. That would force me into a lengthy discovery process that could drag on for 18 months or more before the full value of the company became part of the record. During that time, Olivia intended to request temporary financial support based on that artificially reduced picture of my income and assets. She hadn't been guessing. She'd known exactly what my company was worth for at least a year. She'd simply been building a legal strategy around hiding it. While I was spending Christmas dinner quietly passing bread across the table, she'd already spent more than a year planning how to take as much as she legally could. Melissa told me she'd eventually been asked to notarize paperwork that, in her opinion, intentionally misrepresented the company's ownership structure. She refused. Then she resigned. For 11 days she struggled with whether remaining silent made her part of what had happened. In the end, she decided it did. Everything she shared with me went directly to Thomas. Thomas immediately forwarded it to Rebecca Chandler. If Thomas was the lawyer you wanted when things became complicated, Rebecca was the expert you wanted when numbers started lying. She had spent 15 years investigating financial fraud. She had the rare ability to explain complicated embezzlement schemes with the same calm tone a weather reporter uses to explain rain. Over the next 6 days, Rebecca reviewed every document Melissa provided. She compared those records against corporate filings, banking records, financial statements, and ownership documents. On December 31st, she finished her report. 43 pages. Her findings were devastating. According to Rebecca, during the 18 months leading up to the divorce filing, Olivia had quietly transferred approximately $340,000 from one of our joint savings accounts into an account that existed only in her name. Each transfer had been deliberately kept below $10,000. The payments were labeled as ordinary household expenses. Once the money accumulated, it was moved again into a brokerage account she had opened under her maiden name, Mercer, through an investment firm located in another district. Rebecca's conclusion couldn't have been clearer. The transfers appeared deliberately structured to conceal marital assets. Thomas filed our formal response to the divorce petition on January 4th. Attached to it was Rebecca's full forensic report, Melissa Donovan's sworn affidavit, the complete results of my company's internal audit, and additional supporting documentation that completely contradicted Olivia's original filing. Thomas also formally requested financial disclosures from Olivia within 72 hours. Later, he told me Victor Bishop withdrew from representing Olivia almost immediately after reading our response. Whatever conversation happened between them ended his involvement in the case. Olivia hired a new attorney. Her new lawyer was Catherine Foster. Unlike the first one, Catherine had an excellent reputation. The first words she said to Thomas during their initial phone call were simple. "My client is prepared to discuss a settlement." Looking back now, I think it's important to say something. Stories like this can easily turn into entertainment, watching people fall apart while everyone cheers from the sidelines. That's never been the point. Ethan Mercer was formally charged with financial theft in February. Brandon was charged the following month. Each hired separate criminal defense attorneys. As far as I know while telling this story, both cases are still working their way through the criminal justice system. I don't celebrate that. They made their own choices. The legal consequences belong exactly where they should, with the district attorney's office. The 33 employees who had done nothing wrong were treated very differently. Every one of them received severance pay equal to 2 weeks for every year they'd worked for my company. Each also received a positive professional recommendation. 3 eventually found new jobs through businesses I had long-standing professional relationships with. One of them was Vanessa Ortega. She'd worked beside me for 4 years as a project manager. Her only connection to any of this was being Richard Mercer's goddaughter. About 6 weeks after everything happened, Vanessa called me. She wanted me to know she understood why the audit had happened. She wasn't angry. That phone call was harder than almost anything else I'd experienced during the entire ordeal. The divorce was finalized in March. I'm not going to discuss exact numbers. Those details belong to Thomas, Catherine Foster, and the family court judge who approved the agreement. What I can say is this. Olivia's attempt to portray me as nothing more than a salaried employee collapsed completely under Rebecca Chandler's investigation. In the end, Olivia received exactly what the law said she was entitled to receive. Not $1 more. Today she lives with her parents. I know that because Emma told me. Emma spent Christmas with me in that hotel room. Then, in January, she helped me move into a rented townhouse with working heat and a guest bedroom that immediately became hers whenever she wanted it. One afternoon she stood in the doorway carrying a box filled with books. "Do you want me to bring more of my things from Mom's house?" she asked. "Only the things you want," I told her. She stood there thinking for a few seconds before answering. "I want my books," she finally said. "I don't really need anything else." That answer told me everything I needed to know. Richard tried calling me again. March 8th, then March 11th, then March 22nd. I still don't know how he managed to reach a number I hadn't already blocked. Maybe he got it from someone at the office who didn't know any better. Maybe it was through a new work phone. Either way, he left me a voicemail. I listened to it exactly once. He sounded older than I remembered. Quieter. Like a man who had spent his whole life believing he owned the room, only to suddenly realize the building belonged to someone else. "Nathan," he began. "I need you to know. I didn't understand. I didn't know about your company. I didn't know who you really were." He paused for a long time before continuing. "I want to apologize for everything I said to you, and to Emma, over all those years." Another long silence followed. "I just didn't know." That was the sentence he seemed to believe explained everything. Maybe even excused it. As if not knowing how much money I had somehow justified the way he treated me. But that was never the lesson. The truth wasn't that Richard treated me badly because he thought I was poor. He treated me badly because he believed poor people deserved to be treated that way. The only thing my money changed was that, in the end, there were consequences. I never called him back. I didn't block the number either. I simply left the voicemail where it was. One message. One reminder. And, strangely enough, probably the most honest thing he'd ever said to me. As I'm telling this now, it's June. About 7 months have passed since that Christmas. Emma finished her junior year of high school with excellent grades. She also started working as a co-founder of a landscaping business. That was her decision, not mine. Still, I can't help thinking she's writing her own story now. One built around earning everything herself from the ground up. We have dinner together twice a week. Our conversations are more honest than they've ever been. I no longer feel like I'm performing a version of myself for people who never appreciated the real one. Bennett Home Solutions just finished the strongest first quarter in company history. We're on pace for another outstanding year. Adrian Brooks received a well-earned raise. A few weeks later, he told me he'd used part of it to take his family on a vacation to Portugal. For some reason, that may be my favorite part of this entire story. The navy blue suit still hangs in my closet. I wore it to our January executive meeting. I'll wear it again at the next one. Most days, though, I dress exactly the way I always have. Last week, I drove my old Ford F-250 to meet with the CEO of a property management group that was considering a major annual maintenance contract. When I climbed out of the truck, he looked it over the same way people often do. Part curiosity, part respect. "That's a good work truck," he said. "It gets the job done," I answered with a smile. We shook hands, went inside, and signed the deal. On the drive home, I rolled the windows down and enjoyed the fresh air. The passenger side windshield wiper is still missing. I've thought about fixing it. Then again, maybe I'll leave it exactly the way it is. If you'd like, I can also do a full consistency pass over the entire story to make the narration, pacing, terminology, and character voices completely uniform from beginning to end.